Hello everyone, and Tishdile. Welcome to Tibet Talks once again. I'm Tencho Gyatso, Interim Vice President at the International Campaign for Tibet. Thank you everyone for joining our episode of Tibet Talks on the recently held Tibetan elections. Today we'll have two parts to our program, discussing the elections and the Tibetan democratic system from two different perspectives. Our first guest will be speaking from his experience and observations leading an election observation mission that ICT was involved with during the 2016 elections. And our second guest is a former member of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, a friend and a colleague of mine who will share her views from a Tibetan perspective. At the last segment of the program, we hope to have time for some question and answer. So please remember, as you listen in, to pose your questions. The questions can be posed either on the bottom of the live stream here in the comments section if you're watching on Facebook, or if you're watching on our website, you can email them to us at comments@safetibet.org. And now I would first like to invite Pujung Tsirila, our interim president, to give a brief overview and introduce our first guest. Hello, Pujungla.
Thank you very much, Tencho. Before I introduce our first guest, let me briefly explain the development that is the topic of today's event. On April 11, 2021, the Tibetans in exile went through their once-in-a-5-year system of electing the sikyong, the head of the Central Tibetan administration, as well as members of the Tibetan Parliament. This is part of the democratic reforms that His Holiness the Dalai Lama had instituted soon after coming into exile in 1959. Over the years, he continued to encourage further democratization, culminating in the direct election of the Tibetan political leader by the people today. What makes the elections special is that they take place across several international borders and include different voting systems. While all eligible Tibetan voters can vote for the sikyong, for members of the parliament, Tibetans in the Indian subcontinent vote for 10 members, while those in Europe and the Americas vote for 2 members each, and those in Australasia and regions other than the Indian subcontinent vote for 1 member. Additionally, members of the clergy can vote for 2 more members to represent their traditions. This year, over 60,000 Tibetans took part in the elections. As I speak, the votes have been counted at the regional level, and the final compilation is being done by the Tibetan Election Commission in Dharamsala, the results of which will be announced on May 14th next month. The new sikyong, the political leader, will take office on May 26th, while the parliament will take office from May 30th. Now that's a background upon which our speaker today, Mr. Thomas Mann, will be making his presentation. Mr. Mann was a member of the German Parliament. I'm German member of the European Parliament from 1994 to 2019. He's a member of the Christian Democratic Union. He has had a long interest in Tibet and was president of the Inter-Tibet Group of the European Parliament from 1999 until 2015, when it ceased to exist. He is the founder of the Tibet Interest Group and its president until his retirement in 2019. So I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Thomas Mann to this program. Welcome, Mr. Mann. You observed the Tibetan elections in 2011 in Switzerland, and in 2016, you led the Tibetan Election Observation Mission to Dharamsala in India, jointly organized by the International Network of Parliamentarians on Tibet, in part as we call it, and the International Campaign for Tibet. I was privileged to be accompanying your delegation during the trip. Your mission thereafter came out with its findings in a report, including recommendations for the further improvement of the Tibetan election system. you would have known that some of the recommendations found a place in the final amendments that the Tibetan administration did to the regulations governing the election system. So we look forward to your presentation, and the screen is yours, Mr. Mann.
So thank you very much indeed. First of all, such a delay. And very much I had the opportunity to accept your invitation to participate in the Tibet talks. I would like to make 6 points. The first one, the Dalai Lama in the European Parliament. It was almost 20 years ago when we achieved something special in October of that memorable year 2001. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, was able to address the plenary of the European Parliament for the first time in history. This honor is reserved exclusively for heads of sovereign states. It showed the recognition of the Tibetan cause at the highest European level. We had many works, of course, towards the event of this against the massive interventions and attempts of aggressions by the Chinese people. We, the MEPs from different political groups and the member states, are active in the Tibet Intergroup from, as you said, 1999 until 2019. I was the president of the TIG, Tibet Interest Group. But then there was the caesura of September 11, when the horrific terrorist attacks. The Dalai Lama, he refrained from all appointments to Europe because of the serious security concerns, except of one, to speak in front of the European Parliament. He opened his very moving speech in October 2001 with his words, "I come as a simple monk." He declared dialogue and the peaceful solution to the Tibet conflict. In the long run, he said, China would not escape 3 areas: truth, justice, and peace. The Dalai Lama, he also visited the European Union in September 2016. There was the 7th International Supporters Conference in Brussels in front of 250 participants from 50 countries. Shortly after, he was invited by the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament in Strasbourg. The consequence of the significant stay, China cancelled the visits of already prepared trips of MEPs. We are used to their regular protests and their struggles to suppress Tibetan issues. Second, the democratic direct election of Tibetans. Since many years, it was usual for His Holiness to appoint the Prime Minister of the government in exile, the Kalan Tripa. It was a turning point when in 2001, the Dalai Lama recommended to the Tibetan Parliament that both the Kalan Tripa as head and the Kashak, the cabinet, should be directly elected by the people in exile. In addition, the Kalan Tripa should nominate his cabinet members and seek parliamentarian approval to do so. As a result, the 1991 Charter of Tibetans in Exile was amended. This opened up the democratization process. In his traditional annual speech on March 10 in 2011, he announced that he would be gradually hand over responsibility to the elected Kalan Tripa. It was imperative, he said, that Tibetans should decide their own future. Number 3, Professor Zander Wimpoche. In November 2002, I was able to chair a parliamentarian conference in Brussels. The keynote speaker was Professor Zander Wimpoche, who was the Kalan Tripa for 2 legislative terms from 2001 to 2011. He is the first directly elected Prime Minister of the exiled government. More than 35,000 voted for him in 2 rounds of voting, and he received 84%. Oh, thanks God. In his first speech After the elections, he said, "Our struggle for freedom is not only in the interest of the Tibetans. It embraces the tradition of inner wisdom and unique Tibetan culture as a gift to the entire world." His Eminence, Professor Rinpoche, transformed the political system into a democratic system with the rule of law. This includes 3 pillars of democracy: the legislative, the parliament in exile is a unicameral system, the judiciary, the Supreme Judicial Commission, and the executive, the cabinet, the Kashak, and the minister, the Kalons, make up the executive office of the Central Tibet Administration, TCA. The extensive parliamentary rules and the regulations, including the separation of power, have been constantly implemented. Therefore, Tibetan democracy is rightly considered a democratic system with a high standard of quality. Number 4, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, on March 10 in 2011, there was another central change. His Holiness, he wanted to retire from his political duties. He handed over all political and administrative responsibilities to the democratically elected Tibetan leadership. As a member of IMPACT, as you said, International Network of Parliamentarians on Tibet, I was an election observer in Switzerland. Dr. Lobsang Sangay, he was appointed to office after winning a total of 55% of the vote compared to 37 by Tenzing Titong. 1 year later, in September 2012, this title was changed to be the first sikyong as the political head. Number 5, the election in March 2016. These elections were a very positive sign for the democratization of the Tibetan leaders. Many European parliamentarians came to different places in the world as observers. I was member of the IMPACT delegation to Dharamsala. This included parliamentarians from the United Kingdom, from France, Canada, and Australia, as well as the president of ICT, Matteo Mecacci. We visited different places to follow the voting. Our conclusion? The elections deserves to be called absolutely democratic. They were conducted professionally, held in secret. The authorization to vote was carefully checked in every case. In the run-up to the elections, there had been a very engaged election campaign between the previous Prime Minister Lobsang Sangay, who was seeking the re-election, and the Speaker of Parliament, Pempa Tsering. So there was an open competition, plus heated talks, especially in the internet, as well as campaigns by young teams, as in common in other hemispheres. This kind of passionate debates was interesting for me. It was not well received everywhere. For example, Professor Rinpoche, he saw the harmony and unity of the Tibetans threatened by this very contentious election campaign. However, immediately after this announcement of the election results, both candidates exchanged statements of friendship in front of the international press. They reaffirmed their commitment to the common cause and were able to mend fences. Lobsang Sangay, he was elected with more than 57% of the 58,000 votes cast. During our stay in Dharamsala, we as a delegation had the opportunity to be invited by His Holiness. In the ordinance, he was very positive about the democratization process he had initiated. One more thing about Lobsang, whom I think I've met 8 times in the European Union and of course in Germany. He was received at the White House in November 2020 as the first leader of the Central Tibetan administration. Number 6, my last point, the elections in April 2021. So on January 3rd of this year, the primary elections were held worldwide. Both of the sikyong, the political leader, and the chityus, the members of parliament in exile. Never before has the number of candidates been so large at this time. Pempa Tsering, the former speaker of the parliament in exile, I think he won the primaries. Yes, he won the primaries with 24,500 votes, ahead of Lobsang Sangay's special advisor, Dorji Aukatsan, with more than 14,500 votes. I consider the number of votes cast of more than 60,000 to be evidence of the maturity of democracy. In the second round, the voting of April, the turnover was over 75%. Perhaps Pempa Tsering, he won the elections, but of course the official results will be known in mid-May. My conclusion. We in the European Union, we admire the enthusiasm of the Tibetan people to vote. I can assure you that the European Union will never take the issue of Tibet off our agendas. We support the important memorandum of genuine autonomy of the Tibetan people. We agree with the Dalai Lama's middle way approach. We expect that the dialogue between European Union with China to give high priority also to the issue of Tibet. It should be integrated, no doubt. And as the basis of our political action is the respect of human rights, we will not leave the Tibetans alone. They have the rights for their language, for their culture, their religion, and their identity. I am firmly convinced that the European Parliament, as well as the European Commission and the majority of the Council, and also all the European national parliaments, will remain side by side with our Tibetan friends. Tashi Delek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mann. You gave a very good overview of the history of the electoral developments in the Tibetan community. I'm sure during the question answer session, there may be questions that you will further explain upon. So I hand the screen back to Tencho.
Thank you, Pujunla, and thank you, Mr. Mann, and thank you for staying around till the end so we can have some question answer sessions also. So now I am delighted to introduce our second speaker today, with whom I had the privilege to serve as a member of the 12th Assembly of Tibetan Deputies or Parliament in Exile. So, like me, she was born and raised in India to Tibetan parents who fled Tibet in 1959 to escape China's occupation of Tibet. She has also been an active member of the Tibetan Women's Association, serving as president of the organization both in India and in Toronto, where she resides now as a proud Tibetan Canadian. She also served on the board of the Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy and has over 20 years experience as a social worker and a human rights activist. With a master's in social work, she currently serves as an advocate for refugee rights and family reunion, overseeing refugee programs for new refugees and new immigrants for an agency funded by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada in Toronto. So please join me to welcome Tsering Norzom Thonsur. Tsering Norzom La, welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's so nice to see you. I guess it's been ages since we met the last time. Yes, memory goes back when you talked about our time in the 12th Parliament Assembly of Tibetan People's Deputy. So first of all, Tasha Delay to Pujungla, Mr. Mann, Tencho and all the supporters of members of International Campaign for Tibet, all the volunteers, all the staff. It's an honor to be on the Tibet Talk, and I really appreciate and thank everyone at International Campaign for Tibet, including the chairperson, Mr. Richard Gere, and all the board members, for doing an excellent, work for Tibet, advocating for Tibetan freedom, for the resolution of Tibetan issue, and your support for many years has been very crucial and instrumental in getting the Tibetan issue at the United States Congress. So I just would like to, take this opportunity and thank you. And I'm happy to be here on Tibet Talks. And as a former member of Tibetan parliamentarian, I will do my best to share my memories.
Oh, thank you, Tsering Norzom. And I know you are also an ICT member yourself, so I thank you for that as well. So today, I think for our listeners, we thought it would be also important to reflect on the history and mechanics of the Tibetan elections in exile. And I wanted to focus on that and begin first, if you might give I know you could go into cover many different areas, but a brief overview of the history of the democratic system. Mr. Mann earlier spoke about the more recent in the last developments in the last decade or so, but could you tell us briefly how it began and the degrees of changes that have happened over these so many years since we came into exile?
Certainly, Inshallah. I, as a former member of Tibetan Parliament, as well as a Tibetan, a common Tibetan, I definitely, went back and researched on the history and mechanics of the democratization process in Tibetan exile community. And it goes without saying, like all of us, it goes without saying, and it is solely the vision and the foresight of His Holiness the Dalai Lama that the Tibetan people have been able to have the democratic system, the democratic benefit, if I may call. And thanks to His Holiness that we all, Mr. Mann spoke about it, Pushimala spoke about it, and we all definitely agree that without the guidance, the direction, and the encouragement from His Holiness, we would not have been where we are today. And so if I look back at the history of the Tibetan democratization, or the election or mechanisms you may call, I look at it in three phases. So the first phase, the history of our democratization process into three phases. The first phase would be from the period of 1960s to 1990s. That is the period when the foundation of our democratization process began. And then the second period would be from the 1990s to the 2000s, where there was an interim process where the democratic process was strengthened further. And then from the 2000 until the present day, strong foundation of the democratic process was laid down. And it was during these three different phases of our democratic process that His Holiness made tremendous effort, tremendous change into the community. And we were encouraged to take responsibility and be a democratic citizen. And we were encouraged and forced, I would say, to participate in the democratic process, which was for our own benefit and for the future polity of the Tibetan society. And so when you look at the we all know, Mr. Mann said that, we came to India in 1959 when Tibet was fully occupied and invaded by the People's Liberation Army. His Holiness, along with around over 80,000 Tibetans, escaped to live in India as political refugees. We came here not because we didn't have enough food or enough housing or shelter. We came as a political refugees. And so it was in 59, after we reached India, His Holiness had a vision, had a foresight, and in 1960, I think around February in 1960, in Bodh Gaya, in northern India, His Holiness, when there was a gathering, made an announcement saying that the Tibetan people will go into elections, that Tibetan people will elect their representatives, unlike in Tibet. And he laid the foundation of the first democratic institutionalization and democratization of the Tibetan community or society. And then in 1960, he also gave the Tibetans the opportunity to elect the Tibetan parliamentarians. At that time, in 1960, it was called the Commission for Tibetan People's Deputies. And so the first Tibetan parliamentarians were elected in 1960 and on September 2nd. And they were elected on the basis of the 3 provinces, the traditional provinces of Tibet, and 5 religious sects, which symbolized the tradition in Tibet, which represented the Tibetan people inside Tibet. And so they were elected on the basis of these 2 conditions, whether the provincial base and the religious base. And again, in 1961, the charter for the Tibetan future Tibetan polity was introduced, was announced by His Holiness. He wanted the Tibetans to have a democratic setup where all the institutions of democratic principles were laid down and followed. And so, as Mr. Mann said as well, we had her charter in 1963. The draft constitution for a future free Tibet was announced, and which was later named as the Charter of the Tibetans in Exile. It came to be a very important document. It is similar to the constitution of any Western countries or any countries in the world. And later, His Holiness as well announced where the Tibetan people and the Kaluns, or the Kashak, which is the cabinet, will be also elected and will have more say in the democratic process. So after when the chiefs or the member of Tibetan parliamentarians were elected, the Kaluns or the cabinet ministers were also initially appointed by His Holiness, and they took responsibility of operating the Tibetan administration. And so we had our Kashak, we had her elected member of Tibetan parliamentarians, and also it was during that period, from 60s to the 90s, that the office of Tibets in the West and in India were established. The Tibetan settlement offices were established in South and North India, in Nepal and in Bhutan. And it showed that he wanted the democratic process at all 3 levels, at the national, at the local, and at the international level. And these people, the process of these appointments and elections were encouraged at every opportunity that he had when he addressed the Tibetans on every 10th March. And he made tremendous changes.
And I think at that time, Norzomla, the elections it wasn't directly from the population, from the masses, but it was representatives it was the body of representatives of the Tibetans in exile who were electing the deputies at that time. But it was in 1991 when the first elections amongst all the exile communities took place. Yes, and from then that was a big change, I think. Maybe can you explain a little bit on how that happened and how direct voting from the population, the masses, started?
Sure. When we talk about the elections, it's always going back to the periods where from 1990s to 2000, as you rightly pointed, the Khalung was nominated, and he appointed his cabinet ministers, which were approved by the Assembly of Tibetan People's Deputies. And the Assembly of Tibetan People's Deputies were directly elected by the Tibetan people. And so in 2001, His Holiness made again a drastic announcement whereby he mentioned that he was going to go into semi-retirement, and he wanted the Tibetans to shoulder more responsibility in the democratic process. And it was then that Professor Zander Wimpoche, as Mr. Mann said, was elected directly by the Tibetan people, and he became the first directly elected Khalung, or the Khalung Tipa, as we call, the chief cabinet minister. And he appointed his cabinet ministers. And then in 2001 to 2010, he was elected again in 2006. And in 2011, His Holiness again made a drastic announcement saying that he was going to devolve all of his role in the government polity, remove his authority and powers from the functions of the administration. And he said that he was going to, retire completely, and he encouraged the Tibetans to elect
all along more participation and more responsibility. And I
Absolutely.
think, looking back, when you and I were elected back in in the early 90s, I remember for myself, it wasn't even something that I had the vaguest idea or thought of doing, and it was a time when everybody was, it's our Tibetan culture not to put oneself forth. So I was like, not me, not me. And then when I looked around and everybody was saying, not me, that's when you had to kind of push yourself and step up. And now we're in a place where, as Mr. Mann said, there are so many young of every age, of every different backgrounds, who are all coming forth and putting themselves forward as willing candidates to serve the public. So I think that's a real achievement for our community. Do you feel the same as we?
Absolutely, yes. Because if you look at the current elections and also back in 2016, the candidates were so forthcoming. We saw many candidates both in the sikyong as well as the parliamentarians elections, and we saw many the younger generation, taking part in the election process, campaigning, supporting their candidates, being very active, as Mr. Mann said, on social media. And taking part in the election process itself. And when we look at the election results, the recent one, 2021, we were told that it's the highest turnout, where we had about 83,000 registered voters, and around 60,000 participated in the final process. So it seems that Tibetans are very active, learning the process, getting used to the process, and making conscious effort to contribute to the democratization of the Tibetan society. And like you said, in my time, probably it's same with you when we talk about, canvassing. We were not used to that kind of culture. For instance, from my experience, my family always taught me to be humble and not to talk about yourself, and always ask to work hard, and people will talk about you and people will give you the recognition. So, and I never went and campaigned when I was elected, and I didn't participate at all. So you. And however, now the shift has changed. We see a new shift where you rightly said, we see more candidates coming out and, openly contesting, talking about their manifesto or their programs, as you may call, and participating in debates, open debate. So it's definitely a welcome change.
Yes, and then especially for women, I think His Holiness always stressed the importance for women to take up leadership roles. And even in the parliament, I think I was there only because there were 2 seats reserved for women, and that there weren't any women standing up. So now we have 2. I think the reserved seats still continue, but we have usually more than 2, 3, 4 from each of the regions who end up coming up. So that's, I think, a real
positive change as well.
Positive change, yes.
Yeah. When I look at the stats, I saw that the 15th, there was the election of the women are very consistent, and the highest percentage was 27 in the 15th parliamentarian period. We had about, I think, 13 women who were elected. And then in the 16th, I think we had 10 members who were women and elected. And so the percentage of the women candidates who were elected to the ADPD since the 1990s has been quite consistent, and it has been growing. So which is a good sign as well.
Mm-hmm. And also youth participation, right? I mean, you mentioned it, and I want to stress again how active the youth have been in this current election cycle, not only in terms of standing for as members of candidates for the parliament seats, but also canvassing on behalf of their candidate for the post of sikyong or election. So that's really a positive side. And also the candidates themselves see the youth as their voting base, so they're targeting a lot of their conversations to get the votes from the youth. So I think all of those are really positive steps. Now, I think I want to maybe, some of our audience are probably wondering, how does it happen that the elections take place in so many different countries, and, who goes to vote, and how does this happen? So maybe could you explain a little bit how of that process?
Sure. Actually, when the chief election commissioner and the additional election commissioners, they are the ones who, the office of the election commission are the ones who are responsible for conducting the elections of the parliamentarians and the cabinet ministers. And elections are held once in 5 years. And Tibetans who are above the age of 18 years can participate in the election process. And candidates who stand for the parliament can be, I think, 25 and above can stand as a candidate. And for the sikyong, I think it's 35 and above. And the elections, when they are held simultaneously in every part of the world, in every corners of the world where Tibetans are settled. So we have the South India, the North India, Nepal, Bhutan, and then we have the West, where Europe, North America, and Australia. And so the election commissioner has, regional election commissioners and additional commissioners. So through the offices of Tibet, through the settlement offices in South India, North India, and elsewhere, and in the West through the Office of Representatives. And in absence of Office of Representative Office, we have the Tibetan community centers. So they are contacted and asked to, take charge of the election process. And then in return, they hold the election as per the direction from the Election Commission's office. And once the election is conducted, the counting process is done at the local level, at the regional level, and then the results are sent directly to the election office, Chief Election Commissioner's office, and then they announce it. Like
some areas have as little as 10, 15 members, and others have 100, 2,000, and more. Especially in the Tibetan settlements, they have more, right?
That's right. Yes. And the countings are as well done accordingly, and then the results are transferred to the Chief Election Commission's office. Like Puchingla mentioned in the beginning, May 14th, the formal announcement of the election results will be made by the Election Commission's office. So that's how, whether be it the sikyong or the cabinet ministers or the parliamentarians or the local Tibetan assemblies. We also have in the communities, in settlements, local Tibetan assembly, and they, as well as the settlement officers, as well as at the grassroots level, even the camp leaders, the village leaders, are elected by the election process, through the election process. And so it's very encouraging to see how the democratization of the Tibetan society has helped in establishing at the grassroots level, at the national, at the international level, and how we function just like any normal sovereign country or a government, and conduct our, elections very successfully.
Yes, as we said in the title of this talk, a borderless democracy.
That's right.
Across, except for inside Tibet, which we have no access to. And also a partyless democracy, because we don't have parties. I remember when I was elected as a member of the parliament, I felt I represent the whole of Tibet. So I always, thought of it that way. So I think in this also we may be interesting we have Tibetan media services of, we have Voice of America, we have Radio Free Asia, we have Voice of Tibet from Norway, and we have independent media in Dharamsala, all of whom played, I think, an important role in showing who the candidates are. Because we don't, especially in this pandemic, situation, people aren't traveling around or, canvassing. And so they did a very good job of interviewing and explaining who the candidates were, I thought. That
absolutely. Yes, definitely. I agree with you. And, when we, especially during this pandemic season, crisis, candidates, some of the, one of the sikyong candidates, Mr. Pempat Seringla, he did not campaign in person, and he just maintained campaigning through the virtual platform. And he had briefings, discussions on a weekly basis using the virtual platform. And so likewise, social media was used, and likewise, the Tibetan media played a very important role during this election, as well as in previous elections as well. And for instance, they almost acted like a watchdog, because when I listened to the post-election analysis conducted by the Tibetan media, they were talking about all the strengths and the challenges or the weakness of the election process, and how, despite the pandemic situation, they said that this election was very successful, organized very well by the Election Commission's office, and that there were safety measures were maintained, and that people had access to the polling booth without any challenges. And likewise, they also made suggestions on how the future elections can be conducted more in a more better way, where candidates could participate in more debates, so that people have more information and awareness and knowledge about each candidate's experience and programs and manifestos. And they also said that this was by far the highest voter turnout. Like, I think they said about 81% or something. And so Tibetan media definitely played an important role. They also did interviews themselves, all interviewed the sikyong candidates. They all interviewed the parliamentarian candidates.
Yes.
And so it was a good, creating good political awareness among the Tibetan people.
And also the candidates themselves were using their social media platforms to share them. I wanted to mention there was also a group of volunteer group who put together an online survey, which was interesting also, where called Smart Vote Tibet, by some young Tibetans from Switzerland and here in the United States, where they reached out to the candidates for their with questions that the candidates answered, and then the voters could also go on and answer and see which candidate matched with them. So I think these are all really interesting developments. I want to leave at least some time for questions afterwards. But before we go, the last question for you, Norzom, would be, now the votes have been cast, will be declared on May 14th. And then maybe when do you think the new parliament and new sikyong will take oath of office?
Certainly. I think Puchungla mentioned in the beginning as well. So 14th May, the Election Commission will formally announce the results of the elections for both sikyong and the parliamentarians. And then 26th May, the sikyong, or the president, who is called president of CTA, so will be taking oath. And then May 30th, the Tibetan parliamentarians will take their oath. So once the parliamentarians take their oath, they will be electing their speaker and the deputy speaker. And then they will also be electing their standing committees. And then the sikyong will be, nominating his cabinet ministers, cabinet, and introduced to the parliament in exile. And the parliamentarians will be, electing and approving the nominations. And once they're done successfully, then the election process is complete, and the new president and the cabinet ministers will form their office and run the office. And the Tibetan parliamentarians will similarly, run their tenure and meet twice a year, once in 6 months.
Thank you, Norzom. At this point, we're going to see if there are audience questions. I'm going to ask Mann and Puchungla. So for those watching us, please, if you have questions for Mr. Mann, Mr. Puchungla, Norzom, please post them in the comment section under the stream. And also you can email them to comments@safetibet.org. And for that, I have been shared here by my colleague Ashwin, who's watching the comment section. One question here. It says, the question is, there's been a decline in democracy around the world in recent years. Last night, in his address to Congress, President Biden said America needs to prove that democracy still works. What role do you think Tibetans have to play in preserving global democracy, especially since China is the most powerful authoritarian government in the world?
As usual, China wants to be the hero. It wants to dominate everything, and very often, unfortunately, it's dominating everything. Also in European Parliament, yes, we had our monthly talks, and we invited nuns and monks, ex-prisoners and journalists and professors and so on. But very often the people from China, they tried to interfere because they said it's absolutely impossible. We are there, and also they have too many people there trying to block our work. But we never stopped it. And when you see what we have done on the political base, so we had many urgency debates. We had debates about the situation in Tibet, the re-education camps, and also the importance of the reincarnation, and also about the third pole and so on. So we made everything possible so that we are doing something against the domination of China. In the end, you have to have the invitations with His Holiness and also the next leader, and to make it very often in the public. I remember very well in Germany, the former chancellor, he said no, because of the important role of China, we cannot have a Tibetan leader in the parliament. But Angela Merkel, he invited him, and he said, okay, of course, you are here and you are elected, and of course you have the right to be there. So it's not easy. We will never stop with our voice. We will never stop with our resolutions, and we will never stop to convince also other parliamentarians. We have to have the power because we are based on human rights, and it's a question of human rights affairs. Everything is based on human rights. So never stop. And that's what we've done in the European Parliament, and also when we had the contacts with national parliaments in the European Union, not only in Switzerland, where the people are there in Tibet, highly accepted, no doubt, but also in other parliaments. And then we had the opportunity to invite them to be there in front of the parliaments, in front of committees. That's what we have done.
Yeah, sure. I completely agree with Mr. Mann. And I would like to add that the uniqueness of the Tibetan democracy is, the institutionalization of the Tibetan administration, the Tibetan grassroots offices, the Office of Tibet. It all proves that, when we talk about evidence-based outcome, in social work, we talk about evidence-based outcome, and change and development is so important. So the Tibetan society is a classic case where change and development has happened at all three levels, the micro, meso, and the macro level, at all three levels of society. And it's thanks to His Holiness that we have been able to have this democratization process. And we stand as a role model to the international community. We can be set as a role model and say the Tibetans have been such a successful, despite their weaknesses, their challenges, and shortness of resources, limits of resources. They stand as a successful refugee community whereby democracy is practiced completely at all levels. And we can send a strong message to China by saying, China needs to improve its democratic process. It needs to introduce democracy in China so that the Chinese people and the Tibetan people and the Uyghurs, everyone, the minorities, can have a fundamental right, freedom, and democratic setup. And we need to send the strong message to China saying that the Tibetans' practice of democratization has definitely proved that we are serious and we are committed to improving the society following the modern principles of democratic process.
Thank you. Next, Pujana, would you like to?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Next question we have from Kama Benzom is, would you all know how the elections in Nepal were observed or ballots collected, since Nepal restricted the right to assembly? Nonzumla, maybe you've been following what happened there?
Yes, I was sure, I heard through the news saying that the chief election commissioner stated that although in the preliminary election they did have some challenges, but in the final elections he stated that the election process was conducted and smoothly, and they did not have any challenges. But I'm not sure about the count at this moment. However, the final elections, he stated, went smooth.
I think so one question that I had also in an earlier conversation with you, Mr. Mann, you mentioned, I recall, where you said in democratic system we have to learn that there are no winners or losers, and that it is learning to compromise. So I wanted to, we've also had heated debates, and, when you rally against a person really hard, and then that your wish doesn't come true, then you have to overcome that afterwards in the end. And that's part of the democratic experience that we have to also learn. So can you speak to that, Mr. Mann?
I think the winners, they are, first of all, is the Tibetan society, because so many, they voted. I think this is so important. And when I was there as an observer, I saw the people also from very small, not cities, but towns, but groups there. And then with enthusiasm, they voted. So this was the most important one. And the other one, of course, you should have a competition. It's not a problem. It's not against democracy, but just not the opposite. You have to have some candidates more. And if you are talking with the other one with respect, and of course accepting the other one, that's great. But unfortunately, in these times of internet and as you said, it's the problems with the health people there, and they are not able to move. We have a COVID-19 and so on. So what can we do? We should use the internet, but there are news, but also unfortunately also many fake news. So it's very important that the people are believing in a democratic way, that they are, first of all, are able to vote. Secondly, that they have many candidates also, and they are not, the others are the winners or the losers, but also the losers have the chance the next time to be winners again. So perhaps as in your country, I don't know the results now, but perhaps it's possible, what I said. So, and also we have to fight against fake news, and we have to do it very clearly. The people are only able to identify the problems when they know what are the contents. So what are we doing? What are we doing before? In my opinion, the most important is that you are talking about the contents. You should have a very clear program in some clear words, not too difficult, and perhaps not too intellectual, but also to make it very clear so they are able to integrate the people there. And especially the young ones, they are not only there for playing games and using internet by corresponding about some not high-ranking ideas. No, just the opposite. Many young people, as here in Tibet, we are also in European democracies. Many young people are there also as candidates, and they have their small teams there, and they are fighting, but in a very fair way. So this is the most important. Please don't think at winners and losers. In the end, democracy is the winner.
I quickly want to add to that as well. In the end, I just wanted to say that the election process is very, very important to the Tibetan society. And when you look at some of the pictures in the media, in the Tibetan media, you have old Tibetan amalas, mothers. When they cast their vote, they have the vote and they pray. And even youngsters, younger generation, I saw some of them, having their ballot and praying that may the best candidate win. And so we have a special responsibility as the Tibetans, unlike other Western countries. We have the responsibility to represent the Tibetans inside Tibet who don't have a voice. So we not only represent ourselves who are in exile, but we also are voice of the Tibetans inside Tibet. And so we have a special responsibility, and it is very unique that we have to, take our responsibilities and participate in a very fair way in the elections. And we still have a lot to learn. It's a learning process. Democracy is still at infancy, if I may say so, if I may say so. We still need to go a long way, but we are making a lot of progress. And I said, as we also need to keep in mind, about Tibetans who cannot read and write. Here in the West, accessibility is key. Mobility challenges, accessibility, and translation, interpretation, those are very, very important process. And those Tibetans in the society, in the settlements who don't know to read and write can't access this survey, can't listen to the internet and the social media. So when fake news happens, they may fall into trap. So finally, I think we are doing very good. And it's thanks to the vision and farsightedness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama that we are all enjoying the fruits of the democratic process and the democratization setup in our community.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you to both of you for this interesting conversation that we've been having. Really appreciate. We have a lot to learn, and we have still a long way to go. And thank you for sharing your wise words here. And for our listeners and all the Tibetans who took part in the election, for all those who candidates, all our best wishes for those who will be for the incoming, and for all those who participated. All of it counts and makes us richer and makes us our democracy better. So thank you to everyone, and thank you for our panelists today.
Thank you, Tencho. Thank you, Bhujla. Thank you, Mr. Mann.
And that brings us to the end of our program today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please, our shows are also available on podcast. You can learn more at safetibet.org/pod. Our next episode of Tibet Talks will be live streamed on Thursday, May 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern, our usual. Our guest, we have a special guest, Mr. Tsering Gyatso, who served His Holiness as his in the private office for over 40 years, and it will be on his new book, an illustrated biography of the Dalai Lama. So details we'll post as usual on our website. So please check in at safetibet.org/live for details as they come out. And that's it. Please remember, you can listen to past programs on podcast or YouTube as well. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good afternoon, and we'll see you next time.